I am Naaman, and this is my story. The dust of Aram still clung to my armor when I saw the house. I had expected a palace. I had expected at the very least a man of dignity standing at his gate with arms raised to the sky, calling down fire or wind or some visible sign that would match the weight of who I was. I am commander of the army of the king of Aram. When I ride, chariots ride behind me. When I speak, men move. I had crushed the enemies of my king in battle after battle, and there was a time not long ago when my name alone could quiet a room. Kings have looked me in the eye and known fear, and yet here I stood, in a foreign land, before a plain mud-brick house with a low door and a crooked fence. My whole retinue of horses and chariots crowded into a narrow street in Samaria like a wedding procession that had taken a wrong turn. The irony of it was not lost on me. I had come seeking a cure I could not command. Let me go back, because you should understand what brought me to this door, and what I carried inside my chest long before I ever saw it. I had a sickness. The physicians in Damascus called it by its name in hushed voices. The way men speak of things they fear will spread, simply from being said aloud. My skin had begun to change. First a numbness in my fingertips I told no one about. Then patches, pale and strange, that I covered with looser sleeves and heavier robes, even in the heat of summer. I told myself it was nothing. A soldier convinces himself of many things when the alternative is unbearable. But in the quiet of night, when my wife slept beside me and the house was still, I would lie awake and trace the marks with my own fingers and feel a cold dread that no battlefield had ever given me. I had faced spears. I had faced arrows. I did not know how to face this. An enemy inside my own flesh that no strategy could outmaneuver. I was a great man with a small, growing terror living under my skin. It was a girl who changed everything, a servant girl taken captive from Israel in one of our raids, small and quiet, who tended my wife in our home. I remember the day she spoke, not boldly, not as one who expects to be believed, but gently, the way you might offer someone a cup of water you are not sure they will accept. If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, she said to my wife, he would cure him of his leprosy. I do not know why those words took root in me the way they did. Perhaps because I had run out of other doors to knock on. Perhaps because desperation makes a man willing to follow even a child's whisper across a border. I went to my king, and he, valuing me more than I think I ever fully understood, wrote a letter to the king of Israel and sent me off with a fortune, 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of clothing, fine enough for a king's own wardrobe. I remember thinking, riding out of Damascus with that caravan trailing behind me, that surely this much wealth could purchase anything, healing included. The king of Israel tore his robes when he read my king's letter, certain it was a trap, certain no man could cure leprosy and that he was being set up for war. I did not understand the panic until later. I only knew that word reached a man named Elisha, and Elisha sent for me. So, there I was. Chariots, horses, servants, silver enough to buy a small city, and a door that did not open. Instead, a messenger came out. Not the prophet himself. A messenger. Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be clean. I stood there in the street, and I felt the blood rise in my face before I even had words for it. My jaw tightened. My hand found the hilt at my side out of pure instinct. The way a soldier reaches for a weapon when he has been struck and has not yet decided how to answer. Struck. That is exactly what it felt like, though no hand had touched me. I had ridden for days. I had crossed a border with the wealth of a small kingdom on pack horses behind me. And this man, this prophet who would not even show his face, sent out a servant to tell me to bathe in a muddy river like a peasant washing off a day's labor in the field. I thought that he would surely come out to me, I said aloud, my voice rising enough that the men nearest me shifted their weight uneasily, and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leprosy. I could hear myself as I spoke, and some small part of me, a part I did not like listening to just then, noticed how much of my anger was really about the ceremony I had expected and did not receive. I had imagined a scene worthy of my rank. Gestures, incantations, something grand enough to match the size of my need and the size of my name. Instead, I was offered a river, not even a clean one, not to my eyes. I had grown up on the banks of the Abana and the Pharpar, rivers that ran clear and cold out of the mountains of Damascus, rivers I had swum in as a boy, rivers I would have staked my honor were finer than anything Israel could offer. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? I said, and I turned my horse hard, kicking up dust, ready to ride home with my pride intact and my disease untouched. Could I not wash in them and be cleansed? And I went away in a rage. I want you to understand something about that rage, because I have had years now to turn it over in my hands like a stone pulled from a riverbed, examining every side of it. My anger was not really about the river. My anger was about being told, by the God of a nation I had raided, through a servant I had never met, in a manner so plain and unadorned it insulted my sense of my own importance, that healing was not something I could command or purchase or even fully understand. I wanted a cure that honored my greatness. I was offered a cure that required my humility. Those are two very different gifts, and only a broken man can tell the difference between them. My officers rode after me. I remember the sound of hooves catching up, the particular voice of one of my own servants, a man who had served under me for years, who had seen me command armies, and had never once spoken to me as anything but my lord, drawing his horse alongside mine with something I had rarely heard from him before, courage to contradict me. My father, he said, and even now, remembering that word, something in my chest tightens, because no one had called me that in years, not since I was young enough to still feel like someone's son rather than someone others feared. If the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? I did not answer him right away. We rode in silence for a stretch of road, my anger cooling the way anger does when it has nowhere left to go, when someone has quietly and rightly taken the ground out from under it. He was right, and I hated that he was right, and some small, tired, frightened part of me, the same part that lay awake tracing pale marks on my own skin, was grateful that he had said it. Isn't that the way pride so often works in us? We will climb a mountain for God if he asks it, march into battle, spend a fortune, cross a border with an army at our backs. But ask us to do something small, something that requires no strength, no cleverness, no reputation, just obedience. And suddenly the small thing feels like the hardest thing in the world. I had been ready to be a hero in my own healing. I was not ready to simply be a man in need, washing in a river like anyone else. I turned my horse toward the Jordan. The river, when I reached it, was nothing like the Abana. The water ran brown and unremarkable between low banks, reeds bending in a warm wind, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and river grass. Herons startled up from the shallows as my company approached. My servant stood back at a respectful distance, watching, and I remember the strange vulnerability of stepping down toward that water. Commander of Aram's armies, a man who had never once let himself be seen weak, pulling back my sleeve to look, one more time, at the marks on my own arm before I gave them over to a God I barely knew. I waded in. The first time, the cold closed around my legs, and I told myself nothing had changed because nothing had. The second time, I felt the current pull gently at my robes and thought of every argument I had made in the street outside Elisha's house. Every reason this should not work, every wound to my pride still fresh beneath the surface. The third, fourth, fifth time, I stopped thinking in words at all. There was only the water and my own breathing and the strange, humbling rhythm of obedience without understanding. By the sixth time, my hands were shaking, though not from the cold. I went under the seventh time, slowly, deliberately, the water closing over my head in a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. And when I broke the surface and wiped the water from my eyes and looked down at my own arms, I have no words that do that moment justice. Even now, even after telling this story more times than I can count. The skin was new, not scarred, not healed the way a wound heals with a mark left behind to remember it by. New, soft, whole, like the skin of a child. I stood in that muddy river with water running down a body that no longer carried the thing I had hidden from my own wife, and I began to weep in a way I had not allowed myself to weep since I was a boy, because I understood, in that instant, more truly than I had ever understood anything as a soldier or a commander, that I had been touched by a God who did not need my silver, did not need my ceremony, did not need my greatness at all. only my obedience. I rode back to Elisha's house, a different man than the one who had left it in a rage. This time, I did not stay on my horse. I went in, and I stood before him, an old man, plainly dressed, utterly unimpressed by every title I carried. And I said the only true thing I had left to say. Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. I offered him everything I had brought, silver, gold, the fine robes. He refused every piece of it, would not take so much as a coin, because, I understand this now, the healing was never a transaction to begin with, and he would not let me leave believing it had been bought rather than given. I asked instead for 2 mule loads of earth to carry home with me, so that even in Damascus I might stand on the soil of the God who had healed me when I offered him worship. It seems a small, strange request, looking back, a foreign commander loading dirt onto pack animals, but I needed something to hold on to, some proof I could carry across the border that would remind me, on the days my old pride tried to creep back in, of the river and the mercy and the God who does not require our greatness, only our willingness to go down into the water when we are told. I am Naaman, commander of Aram, and I was a great man made small enough to be healed. If you are waiting for God to meet the size of your name, your title, your wealth, your worthiness, hear me. He is far more likely to meet you in the plain, unadorned obedience you feel too proud to offer. Wash in the river you think beneath you. Do the small thing. That is where I found him waiting. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend.